Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez. Hello, hi, wow, and welcome to the show. It's episode 7, and I'm really excited as today we are sitting down with visual creative Noémie Marguerite. Noemie is a photographer and filmmaker currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Her expressive work spans studio portraiture, editorial, events, and film, and has been featured in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Fast Company, and the New York Times, to name a few. Oh, and the title of this episode? It's trademarked by Noemie. I'm really excited for you all to share in this magical conversation, so let's just get into it. Noemie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Is that right? Are you still based in Brooklyn? Did I nail it?
Yes, I'm still here. We'll see for how long, though.
I mean, I think that's the thing about New York is that it always kind of catches and releases, and it'll be there. If you go somewhere else and come back to it, it'll be there.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, before we dive in, I have so much I want to talk to you about. But first of all, I mean, how are you doing?
I'm okay. It's been a roller coaster of emotions the past couple of months, but I'm kind of like, what is my next chapter supposed to look like?
I love that.
Yeah.
You're in the right place. You're in the right place.
Yeah.
I mean, you work in such a emotionally kind of grounded, space of, you're really asking for emotion from your subjects or from yourself. So when you're going through kind of that transition or that thought of like, what am I going to do you feel like that shows up in your work?
I don't know. I only work when I feel like it, like in regards to my personal work. Yeah. And I haven't really been doing a lot of personal work lately, but that's kind of changed a bit where I'm like, okay, I need to get back into it. So I don't know if it's fully present where you see that indecisiveness, but because I don't force anything, when something's out, you know that I was all in when I did it.
I love that. And I think that is something that you can kind of tell, at least I can, when someone is in a creative field and you're like, did you even want to be here? Did you do this thing because you had to? And one thing I love is that you have, I mean, even in your Instagram bio, which I'd love to talk about, like how the platform is, in affected your work, but you say, I believe, and hopefully I'm not misquoting, but you say I'm an artist and I'm intentional about my shit. Is that...
That is the vibe? Right. It's actually trademarked. So
I love that.
Made sure to like own that statement. But yeah, I'm really big about intention. And to your point about Instagram, it's exhausting to see the continuous like performance that I feel like a lot of people are putting on. And in a way, it's kind of heartbreaking because, I don't know, I feel like people are in this state where they feel like the only way they can feel validated about their lives is if they romanticize it. And there's benefits to romanticizing your life. There's something about like finding, how cool or exciting it is to like wake up in a certain place or like something exciting about your neighborhood or something about exciting about getting a matcha. Like there is something that you should like highlight or celebrate about that. There is like, I get that aspect, but I feel like we've gotten to a point where it's just gone way too far. And I think there's this fear of acceptance that the mundane could be like 90% of your life, and that's okay too. So I'm trying to realize how I got to that point. But
well, I think it relates to that intentionality, right? I mean, you're talking about being intentional about your shit. And I think that if there is an intention with the work, or if you're mindlessly posting your matcha because you feel like you have to versus, hey, I went to this amazing place in my neighborhood and I love this business and I want to put it out there because I love it, not because I have to.
Exactly. And that's my biggest thing. Even for myself, it's just a reminder to not feel like I have to conform or force anything that doesn't feel right for me, even though it may not align with everything else or the climate of trends within photography or the creative world. So I really, whether it's work or personally, I'm very intentional in how I express myself.
Yeah. And I think that, going back to your kind of younger self, I think
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, I was really struck by the 10 years later, piece that you created. And
Mm-hmm.
first of all, like I have nerdy goosebumps talking about it again because I was so struck with young Noemie, and we
Yeah.
get to see you, and there's this sweetness and this rawness, but also this
Mm-hmm.
awareness that
Mm-hmm.
was so obvious to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think especially as a woman, the way that you spoke to yourself, and for
Mm-hmm.
anybody listening, you have to go watch this. We're going to link it in the show notes, but it was really moving how you already knew some of the things that you may be faced with later as an
Yeah.
adult.
Yeah.
And that intentionality were you 10 in that video?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So as a 10-year-old, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
saying to yourself, like, there's a part where you say, like, you're not fat, some people just
Mm-hmm.
weigh more than others.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
cried. I have to tell, I
Oh.
did, because that kindness that you're able to
Right.
speak with is so rare. And
Yeah.
you knew it from so early. Can you talk
Yeah.
about like what it was like to find that video? Did you remember shooting that?
I don't remember shooting that. I remember there's so many home videos I need to convert, but there's some that I remember, but when I saw that, I'm like, I don't remember this at all. But yeah, I had discovered a lot of like tapes at my parents' house, and I think it was around the time where I had realized or just kind of got memories of the fact that I attempted suicide when I was 17. And I
Mm.
suppressed that memory to the point where I completely forgot. And it came back before my 27th birthday. And so, yeah, I had this idea of doing like an exhibit around it because I did a lot of self portraiture, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do like something about just like me over the years. And then I found this home video and I saw myself and I heard these words and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is it. Like this is kind of like the person I want to go back to because, yeah, my younger self was very like innocent and I don't know, like I still have that within me. And it's kind of cool because my husband brings that out of me. Like, I'm
Mm.
very silly. I'm very sensitive just in general. But I think
Yeah.
my younger self was more accepting of, my sensitivity. Um, but yeah, when I saw it, I was just like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to align with and just kind of not let go of because that version of me saved my 17-year-old self. And so even now, like with the pandemic, post pandemic, just body changes, I've been going through a lot of like body changes, and that's just been really, really hard for me. And so, um, just hearing my younger self have this wisdom, I'm like, okay, if I had it then, I still have it now. I just kind of have to like dig through the bullshit and just channel that. So it's surreal. I honestly don't know where that wisdom came from. Like I watch Disney Channel movies
Yeah.
like everyone else. I am the youngest of three, so I don't know if being around older people, I don't know. I guess I've always had that level of awareness. And I just want
Yeah.
to make sure I don't lose it.
I mean, that's really beautifully said. And to also find such a kind of a prism of this, spectrum of who you have always been, and
Mm-hmm.
to relate it back to one of the darker times, I would imagine, in your life. And I think oftentimes, like, the best artists are the ones who have not had it all handed to them, but
Mm-hmm.
also having traversed some really difficult times. But something that's really unique about what you said is that you almost didn't dwell on the difficulty. Instead, you actually came to the other side of it and said, let me go back even before that difficult moment to this younger self that is me. And I think that's something that as I get older, I'm a new mom, yes, definitely, like there's a certain innocence that does come from that, younger self. And I mean, I was looking at my son the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, this kid's like so perfect and so innocent, and there's going to be things that I can't protect him from, but damn it, if there's like anything I can block out now, let me do that. Right. Yeah. I think that's really beautiful. And I do love that you mentioned that your husband brings out that side of you too. Cause I think that like inner child and looking after like that part of yourself is so important, and also comes through. I mean, your work, like the self-portraiture, you mentioned a lot kind of in what you just said about body changes and seeing yourself. I know photographers who will never get in front of the lens ever.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so documenting that, and we are oftentimes our worst critics, right? And also we have an opportunity to, be able to, take away the criticism. And I will say, like, something about sitting with you for a portrait session, you're able to really disarm your subjects in the most beautiful way. And I think that is a gift. And maybe it's because you've done that for yourself. Am I making that up?
No, not at all. I think my experience with doing self-portraiture has helped me gain a level of empathy towards like studio sessions, because I know what it's like to not know how you look like when you're taking photos, and and I haven't really gotten my portrait taken by other people. So I have nothing to compare that to. So it's also interesting when people are just like, yeah, like this has been the most comfortable session I've ever had. And like, there's photographers that don't show the images. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like,
right.
Comfort is that's the thing that allows the subject to disarm, to feel comfortable, to feel safe. And so it's really important for me, that's felt, because that's how I ensure that my self-portraits are authentic and genuine. It's like, if you don't smile, that's fine. Like, there isn't like a one way to do things, which is what I typically tell people in my sessions. It's like, you don't have to be a model to take a good photo. You just have to show up as you. And in order for me to do that, I have to get to know who you are and what you like and don't like. And so that's incredibly important for me. And I guess my hope is that grace is continued on after the shoot. And it also helps me too. Like, seeing, to your point about us being the worst critic, there are people during the shoots where they're just like, oh my gosh, like I hate my arms, I hate this. And I do not see it at all. But I get it, because I am that way to myself. So it's just like, I have to leave that space of patience and understanding and just be like, okay, like we just see ourselves differently.
Yeah. And it is funny, like we can look in the mirror and see something about ourselves and it's like all we see. And there's nothing like, I mean, we've all worn an outfit that's like very uncomfortable and you're like out of your house and all you can think about is how it's like digging in, or there's a strap that won't stay where it's supposed to be. And you're like, what did I do to myself?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that honesty, really comes through in your work, and I think that, there's a lot of sincerity, intentionality, I think will be the word we go back to probably a lot here. But I think that also, there's sort of a progression in your work too. So tell me a little bit about, I did see, you don't have to talk about it too much, but I did see you had an internship back in the day. And you were doing, before you were in photography, you were doing web development?
I was. I built
I'm
websites.
like a super sleuth. Yeah.
No, I love that. Yeah.
Tell me about it. So, okay, first of all, in the STEM space and in tech, I think that it's a great avenue to kind of pursue, but also it can be really isolating. What was it like to kind of go into that space, and did you have to turn off your visual brain? Because I do think that there's like left brain, right brain. I would say development kind of saturates the left side, creativity, the right side. Was it hard for you to channel into that space, or was it a release?
Not really. So my left brain loves math. Like I loved AP calculus. I like formulas because it's like something equals something else. And so coding coding was a cool, thing for me. It was like a puzzle for me. And I still enjoy puzzles to this day. So I think it activated that side, but I also loved websites and like web design. And so that's where the creativity came in, user experience, like how someone uses a mobile app, how someone uses a website, like functionality and creativity meshing together was very cool for me. But then even as I was working as a web developer, like I still took photographs on the side. So I made
sure you weren't like turning that off.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, it was still a side gig. But yeah, it was a cool balance for me at the time.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And then, I mean, fast forwarding to going kind of out on your own, because you were working in design for a while. Can you talk about like that kind of progression from you did some development, you were doing graphic design, and then when did you say, let's close the door on this work that I'm doing here and let's focus on photography? What was that like for you?
It was an intentional move. So I was working as a brand designer in New York, and I had my 1-year review, and it was great. I was on track to being promoted. Through that, venture, like I said, I was taking portraits on the side, so I was still doing a side hustle even with the main job. And the week after my review, I got laid off. And I always tell people like the order of events was God's way of telling me that I did nothing wrong. Because I was just kind of like, wait, what is going on? Like, I just got these rave reviews and like, I'm getting laid off, like whatever. But I decided to, do a little staycation and kind of think about it. And I was like, okay, let me look for other design jobs. When I was looking, it just didn't feel right. I'm like, I don't think I want to do this. And so I had a couple of gigs lined up, and one of them had my photos featured on Vogue.com, which was like
casual.
Right. Which was the first time I've ever gotten featured in that way. And so I was like, okay, let me just try this and see where it goes. And knowing that if it doesn't work out, I can try something else. And so I am still trying 6 years later. But yeah, I definitely thought it through, and I'm just like, I don't want this to be a what if, so I might as well do it.
Yeah. And I think that is, first of all, thank you for sharing. That's really beautiful. And I appreciate the vulnerability too. But it is those moments where it feels like your whole world is in this one area. For me, I worked at a really cool agency in New York, and I moved to New York full time for that job. I had all of my friends were somehow related to that environment, and I got fired. I thought it was my dream job, and they fired me. I thought I was getting promoted. It was fucked up. They brought me in this room, and they were like, so your passion and your ideas and your projects, they're really extending beyond, the description of your role. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so seen. I'm killing it. They're like, so today's going to be your last day. And I was like,
oh,
what?
wow.
Yeah. And it was like this really bizarre moment where at that instance, I felt like everything was crashing down. I mean, I remember leaving and just being like, you can throw everything in my desk. I don't even know what I'm going to do. Like, walked to my car, and I was like, what am I going to do? At the time I had not a lot of money in my bank account, and I had just sold a house that I owned in a different state. And it was like I sold it to an ex-boyfriend. I mean, come on. There was something happening in the universe, I was like, okay, well, I have this little bit of money. It wasn't much that I made on the profit of my house after I squared up all my finances. And I have enough to get me through like 3 months. Okay. I have a trip to Paris coming up that I've wanted to take for a while. And I remember on that trip, I was sitting in the hotel jet lagged, applying to like every job I could find, every job. I came back and I had all these interviews and I was interviewing and I'm like, what am I even doing? Like my heart wasn't in it. Right. And I remember that feeling. And then I had, like you said, kind of what happened with Vogue. I had a really fortuitous, former client pop up and say like, hey, I need to do all of this, work. We would love to bring in an executive coach. We'd love to have someone help us set up our systems. Would you be open to like taking on a contract, like 10 hours a week for the next 6 months? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, well, what you're asking for is more than 10 hours a week. So let me talk to you about my money.
Right.
All of a sudden it was like that took shape and it was easy for me to say, okay, fuck this. I'm not applying for a million jobs. Like I'm not going to go work at, like, I'm not a company man or whatever they say.
Yeah.
And I became my own, my own boss. And it was really liberating and it was really scary to take that chance. But something you said really struck me when you were like, yeah, I could always try it and I can go back to something else if it doesn't work. But yeah, it worked. It worked really well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think those events kind of put us in touch with like the truest version of ourselves, right? Because you don't have to, you're not reporting to anyone. You're not trying to like ace the performance review, even though like you did.
Yeah.
It becomes not about that. So when you become your own boss, let me ask you, like, how do you ensure that you're growing when you're not having a performance review? And especially for someone listening who's considering going out on their own, what advice might you give them from your learned experiences?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's twofold. There's definitely the technical side. So right now, I'm teaching myself lighting, like studio lighting, but I'm also realizing that there's photographers who know nothing about lighting because someone is hired for that.
Right.
But just out of my own curiosity, like I just want to learn, but it also will help me with cinematography, which, I hope to venture in soon. But yeah, I would say if there's anything that you don't know yet, or you realize a lot of clients are asking for, kind of step into that from the technical aspect. But then also looking back at, emails that maybe have gone south or where you didn't hear from the client again, or like the soft skills are incredibly important. The business aspect is incredibly important. So, budgeting, like how did your taxes look this year versus next year? Like that's kind of the metric I give to myself where I'm like, okay, let me make sure I follow up. That's my biggest thing this year. Last year, or even in the past years, I realized like there's moments where I didn't say thank you, or like thank you for reaching out, or I didn't follow up and checked in, because I don't have an assistant. Sometimes I just miss an email. Like that's what happens. Yeah. But now I just review and I'm like, even if that was 3 months ago, I'd be like, hey, I'm realizing I didn't follow up. Thanks so much. Let's, continue that relationship. And so that's kind of how I measure whether I improved or what I need to improve on. Fortunately, I do have friends and colleagues that also give advice, but I know not everyone has that access. So just kind of like a self-reflection of like, what is something that you feel kind of felt off, and like what aspect that you feel could have been improved by that could definitely be helpful.
Yeah. And I think that you're right. And it's funny we call them soft skills because I think that they're kind of the most essential ones, right? Just the communication or just, and it's interesting. I think that, those are the things that kind of make or break, the relationships, the talent is there, but I mean, I've definitely worked with people and it's like, oh, that person is a dick. I don't want to work with them again. But then you work with someone else and you're like, wow, there's a lot of good energy here. There was gratitude. You might even be more willing to like let something go if like the coloring had to be redone a second time because of whatever happened. You might say, yeah, but I'd rather work with Noemie than, this person who is terrible.
Right.
Yeah. So I love that you talk about that. I mean, are there, in terms of like the industry, when you were kind of starting to see the I'll say reap the rewards of your work, seeing the press and, I know you were featured, you mentioned in Vogue, but also you've been in other publications. It's not your only one. I mean, there was Fast Co and you were in the Times as well, in New York Times. I mean, again, very casual. I realize I'm about to pull this out of you, Noemie. Yeah.
That is a common thing.
It's a good thing. Yeah. So when you started to get that traction, did you feel like you had to change how you advocated for yourself and the way that you wanted to work? Because I know that attitude can shift from, hey, I saw you were in this publication, so you work for me now and you're your own boss.
I don't think I switched up in any way.
I love that.
I still give the same energy. I am more firm though. And I do have a lawyer, and he has been amazing, just not only with contractual work or just like reviewing contracts, but just also instilling a lot of confidence and explaining to me like, hey, you're able to say this, you're able to negotiate that. But yeah, I don't even, how like when you post or you share work that you did and it's from a big publication and everyone in the comments is like, oh, rates are going up, or like, like you have entered a new tier. I don't think I've felt that way. And sometimes my husband's just like, you got paid this amount for this, like, and I'm like, I get that, but I don't know. I feel like it depends. It's not as straightforward. It's not linear. Like there's some clients where I'm just like, okay, I know you're lowballing me. Like, let's try to get to a point where that makes sense. And there's others where it's clearly that they've never worked with photographers before. And so I'm way more patient in that. So I feel like I didn't really, or I haven't let, the features of the press affect how I act towards people. I think I've kind of stayed the same.
I mean, thank you for being that way, because I think that's not always the common theme here.
Yeah.
And I think that you mentioned the firmness. You also mentioned, when someone is lowballing you, and that is something I wanted to talk about, because I think setting rates, I think there's often a level of being self-conscious, of getting comfortable with like, what are our rates? So what's kind of your approach when you're setting that standard? And also when you have a client that you do feel is lowballing you, how might you approach that? And it's not someone who's a lack of education. I appreciate that you also notated those are two different things.
Yeah. So in those moments, I let them know like, hey, here's a rate that I usually do, like, let's meet in the middle. So in that situation, you're letting them know, I actually charge up here.
Yeah.
I know what you're doing. And if I still want to work with them, it's like, okay, let's see if we can meet here. That way I can acknowledge, or it's out in the open that I am accepting a rate that's lower than I typically do, rather than them feeling like that rate is my standard. Being vulnerable about just like, hey, my rates are typically around here, but if your budget's down here, I'm able to be flexible in this space. If not, if that doesn't work for you, then like we part ways. But it is tough, and it kind of comes down to the point like, do you want this job or not?
So you're making a decision on if you want to be flexible, right? Like you're not always just like, oh yeah, let's meet in the middle. So it's not like your negotiation tactic is to start high and then meet them. So what would be an instance where you might consider that versus an instance where you're like, no, this is not worth my fucking time?
If it's someone or a client that I want to work with again, or if it's something that I've never done before. So like, I'm in this space now with like video opportunities where I'm pretty flexible on my rates, because I still can't gauge where I am within the scale of like, of how to charge, because I don't know how it is with the video world. So those are kind of the instances where it's like, okay, I haven't done this before. I'm curious. Let's try this. Or I can see the long game in this. They know certain people in the industry, or they've worked with other clients that I'm interested in. Let me kind of engage in that way. But yeah, it has to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, there is that. Let's go back and talk about Instagram, because we started off talking about that. And I think it can be a really great platform to gain exposure, to have kind of an up-to-date current portfolio. I mean, I often see that with artists. I mean, I remember when I first started getting tattooed, like 20 years ago, and you'd have to go into the shop and like open someone's book and literally look through their past designs. And then you're kind of feeling this pressure to like make a decision on the spot, versus now, if I want to look at a new tattoo artist, I can go on Instagram, I can pull up their profile, I can kind of have, and it also feels like people tend to share a little bit more, 80% of the way finished work. It's not all perfect and polished. And with photography, I mean, Instagram started out as a photography platform, maybe not for photographers specifically, but as a business tool, I can see the advantages, but I can also see that there's, from the social standpoint, there's always the commentary. There's always the comparison game. So can you talk a little bit about that, like in the photography world and some of the feelings around that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of my weakest qualities, personality traits. I don't know what to categorize it as, but I have a tendency to compare a lot, unfortunately. So I have had to take a lot of Instagram breaks because I can't handle it. Like I see photographers with certain opportunities. I'm like, dang, like I really wanted that. Or like, they're getting it again. Like this is, and like, and I don't want to become resentful. I don't want to become bitter. I am naturally that person that roots for everyone and, genuinely happy for everyone. And so in those moments where I sense that like anger and that frustration and that bitterness, it's like, okay, I need to step away. But it's tough. Yeah. It's tough. I feel like it has, I don't know, reduced not the quality of work, because the quality of work is still there, but I don't think people have really, it doesn't allow people to take the time to understand what they like and don't like, because everything is happening so quickly. So there can be an amazing photo that's posted, but another amazing photo is posted an hour later. Like we don't really have time to like sit and admire, what we're seeing is just like, all right, what's the next one? What's the next one? And like, I think because of that dopamine pattern, it creates this standard that doesn't make sense, or the expectation of, taking photos and posting all the time. And that's something that I definitely don't do. And so that's another aspect that's hard, where it's like, I know if I don't post, I am forgotten, quote unquote. I'm not top of mind. And so the people that do reach out are like people that really, admire me, in those silent moments. And I think that's honestly the hardest part, because it's just like, I know if I'm not active, if I don't post as much, I'm not top of mind for a lot of people. But it's worth the risk, because mentally, I just know where it leads me to if I just feel like I'm in this unsaid competition. And so, yeah, it's a weird, unfortunate platform.
Yeah. I wonder what 10-year-old Noemie would have to say about this.
She would not care. She would post whatever she would want to, which is where I'm trying to get to. It's so hard though.
And that
It's
rendition of
hard.
Happy Birthday, would be, we'd have a whole SoundCloud. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I think that you're right. It is such it's such an interesting platform, and it is kind of the blessing and the curse, right? But that need to, or feeling that you need to stay relevant or stay in charge. I mean, when you have a post that is sort of outperforming, and it's not, let's say, your favorite post that you've done, or, it gets more traction than others. Does it stay in your mind when you're thinking, what am I going to post next? What am I going to share next? Or do you push it away?
It depends on my mood. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like, well, actually, it's not even that. I think I get frustrated because I'm just like, this one was so much better, or like, I know if there's a photo of a celebrity that I took that I just like because of the photo, like, of course it's going to get more views, and that can be frustrating sometimes. Because there's other photos of just like the colors is just the focus. And I'm like, look at these colors, and so I get annoyed.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing with like museums. It's just that people don't have a place to write whether they heart it or not. It's just, you don't hear those comments. Like here, you hear it, you see it, people share it, it's everywhere. And it's always open for critique. And sometimes that's not the intent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the interesting thing about people moving so fast on the platform with Instagram too, is that sometimes there is that like explanation or that commentary in the, the caption.
Yeah.
And I feel like people skip right over that a lot of times.
They do.
Right. And they don't even see, and I'm not sure which one you're talking about. I mean, I remember, and, I had noted, that there was a really beautiful photo of Jonathan Majors that you posted. And, but also there was a story behind it about John David in Washington and how that progressed to you shooting. And I actually made the assumption, because I know that you lived in Atlanta. I was like, oh, did you like know John David in Atlanta? Like, wow. I had this whole, like, I made up a thing in my mind when I first saw it. I was like, wow, how'd you know?
Yeah.
But you talked about something really cool and really vulnerable in that caption about kind of freaking out that you had to get this shot list.
Yeah.
You confessed that, right?
Yeah.
I love that you shared that, because I would feel that way too. I'd be like,
right.
How do you want me to, you want me to just go?
Yeah.
And you've also, taken a lot of photos of high profile individuals. Do you ever feel starstruck? And if so, like, how do you kind of put that to the side, or what keeps you grounded in those moments?
Yeah. So I feel starstruck if I don't know if they're there. So if I know who's coming or who I need to take photos of, I have that freak out moment then, and then I'm in work mode. But like, I remember when I photographed Missy Elliott's VMA after party, I had no idea who was going to show up, and they were like, just stand by the door because that's where everyone's coming in. So I'm just like, okay. And so like Queen Latifah comes in, I'm like, okay. And then I take photo, or like Regina King. I was, oh
my gosh.
It took me quite a minute to calm down, but I always stay professional. But yeah, I'm able to kind of like be in work mode. So it doesn't really register for me. I'm just like, I need to get this shot. I want it to look cool, and like, that's it. So I have the same approach even with like studio sessions, where I'm like, let me make sure I give them space, good timing. It can be quite aggressive in those events where it's just like, okay, we need, and I'm just like, that's not me, but yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah.
I think that's, it is really, I mean, like you mentioned, like some pretty high profile names, also like some really amazing women who have been really groundbreaking in those spaces. And then like casually the VMAs after party hosted by Missy Elliott. Right. And you're like, I mean, and I think like going in those spaces and making sure that you're visible, but
Mm-hmm.
also, making sure that you're not putting yourself in a position where you feel uncomfortable and you're saying stay professional. I
Yeah.
think that's a lot of balancing to do while you're, also taking really composed, beautiful photos,
Right.
and
Yeah.
keeping your hands
Yeah.
steady.
Yeah.
When you're in that position, do you ask for kind of an invite list ahead of time? Can you do that? Or is it, you just have to go in and be like, I get what I'm given?
I mostly go in and get what I'm given. But
Yeah.
they sometimes send in talent lists. So they show the photo and the name, just in case you're not familiar. So
Yeah.
I'm able to prep that way where I'm like, okay, this is who I'm expecting to see.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a favorite subject that you've shot, whether it's,
Hmm.
portrait studio sessions or, otherwise?
Um, I would probably say Coleman Domingo.
Yeah.
Um, he was very just poised and like he is what you think he is. Just very like peaceful and calm and chill. And I'm just like, I love this. I would love to take his portrait again.
Do
And
you hear
John
that,
David.
Coleman? You're wanted. Yeah. We need you. Yeah.
And then John David Washington it was very down to earth, like very just like yeah, like friendly and like I don't know. It's yeah. So that I think those two stand out to me off the top of my head.
That's amazing. And
Hmm.
did you make the ATLian connection with John David Washington? Did you?
I did not.
Oh my
I
gosh.
because you know some I never know how to engage in that way.
Mm,
Um, my assumption always is that they have something they need to do. So I don't
mm.
want to like bring up things and like and it's funny because I actually did that once with someone where I asked them, like, oh, like, because they did a podcast. And I'm like, oh, when are you going to do that podcast again with so and so? And she just kind of like chuckled, but I sensed tension. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay. And then later on, I found out that they have beef, and I had no
Oh.
idea. And so I
Oh
was like,
no. Yeah.
okay, never mind. Not going to do
Yeah.
small talk.
You're like, I'm
So
going to edit out the fact that you look triggered in the second half of these photos we took.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is good guidance too, is like that decision not to get too personal can
Mm-hmm.
always be, it's an interesting tension and balance to find because you want someone
Mm-hmm.
to feel at ease, but
Mm-hmm.
also don't want to say like, so tell me about your parents. And they're like, that's the wrong question or,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And I think that, knowing that there's a lot of people who have, a lot of self-conscious kind of feelings about sitting in front of the camera. If you
Mm-hmm.
then set them off on a spiral on something else, it could be like
Yeah.
perfect
Yeah.
storm. Not perfect storm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And, so I had a question, I mean, it was just New York Fashion Week. I know
Mm-hmm.
that you photographed previously the Pure Moss show.
Mm-hmm.
And, how is kind of like your temperature on the fashion industry because it's
Mm-hmm.
so fast moving, because it's so now content driven? Has that shaped, kind of the differences in how a lot of like those things are photographed?
Hmm. Yes and no. I mean, not even just fashion. I think everything is influencer focused, which
Mm,
is really weird for
it
me.
is weird. I agree. I totally agree. Yes.
It's just like, yeah, photograph this person. I'm like, who? And then I look it up and it's just like, oh, they just have a lot of followers. Like, they're not
Yeah.
even related to the brand or like, I have stories, but I'll be nice. Um, but yeah, I love I love shooting New York Fashion Week because I really love fashion.
Yeah.
And so I typically do backstage for the most part, just kind
That's
of
great.
like in the process. But I feel like now it's I don't know, it's like this level of accessibility where it's not about the fashion anymore. It's just about the fact that you have access to this platform. And so that's been a bummer where it's, the focus is on the wrong thing, in my personal opinion. But
Yeah.
I would love to do like lookbooks and like, I love fashion. So I don't know. I haven't been as involved as I used to be, not by choice. It's just kind of been that way. And I also think just like, you know, with influencers and just their ability to like capture on their phone, and like kudos to them because I do not know how they do it. But like
Yeah.
with the videos and the TikToks and the reels and the photos, it's like that, you know, that helps the budget. So it's like, why would we hire a photographer if they're able to both capture the show, capture their point of view? They may be even wearing the clothes. Like, that's a better marketing scheme. So I get it. It sucks for me, but I totally understand it. So, but that's just my personal experience. I'm sure it's different for other photographers, but that's what
Well,
I've
no, I think
noticed.
you touch on something that's really important, to also decipher is
Mm-hmm.
that, when people are getting access, and I like that you talked about access and you talked about, that kind of, there is a certain privilege to being in those spaces. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I see all the time someone who I'm like, who is this person? And then I
Mm-hmm.
look and they have 1 million followers and I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
literally have no idea who they are
Mm-hmm.
at all. And
Mm-hmm.
they're somehow at every show, I mean, that I would just absolutely die to be at, for
Mm-hmm.
fashion or, those types of things. So you talk about kind of the love that you have for something and how that almost doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And because it's about, influence or the ability to influence or to build social following, social
Mm-hmm.
currency.
Mm-hmm.
Who are your favorite? Let's talk pie in the sky. Who are your favorite designers? If they were like, Noemie, we want you to come shoot, you'd be like, I'm already outside your window. What do you need?
Christopher John Rogers.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
I'm obsessed with his work. Like, oh, everything he has made. I'm just like, I need this. And so I even told my husband this. I'm like, once I reach a certain tax bracket where I feel okay purchasing one of his items, he will be like, I want a dress from him. Like, I want him to, make my wedding dress. Like,
Yeah.
he's just up there. Who else? Hanifa is great. I have a lot of her clothes as well. I've worked with her, I think once or twice before. But yeah, Christopher John Rogers, I'm just like obsessed.
Yeah, his designs are so beautiful because you just feel good. And I like his
Mm-hmm.
energy and the way that he
Mm-hmm.
engages with people who wear his clothes. And I
Yeah.
think that, there is a through line that you haven't called out specifically, but I think that there is a lot of, connection to the Black community, in the
Mm-hmm.
work that you do and the subjects that you shoot, but also even the people who you mentioned, today. And so I'd be
Yeah.
remiss not to talk about it. And I
Yeah.
think that there is, an opportunity for more space there,
Mm-hmm.
for yourself, and I'm not sure how you identify, but,
Mm-hmm.
in that community, being able to be behind the lens and
Mm-hmm.
offer someone a safe space. What is your approach, in engaging with subjects who are coming from perhaps communities or, places that aren't as represented?
Um, it's not totally different. It's, I think about like studio sessions. It's kind of it's the same spectrum
Yeah.
because, with studio sessions, it's individuals who typically either don't have their photo taken because they feel like they don't deserve to, or they don't qualify to have a photo taken, or like, you know, they tend to like they're using this opportunity to kind of elevate themselves. And so there's still that same level of patience, there's still that same level of grace and like understanding where, you know, you have now made this decision to be seen, and that is a delicate journey. So like that's how I approach it, to where it's like, okay, this is new. um it's a great decision to make, but I know it still feels weird. And so my biggest thing is just being respectful.
Mm.
Whether it's studio sessions, whether it's, the Black community, whether it's a high profile individual, it's like, I don't know what's going through your brain, but I know being captured, being seen is like a very overwhelming process. So, I take it, lightly, and I make sure to respect the space.
Yeah. And I think that that is something that, again, like offering that and treating things as, face value as they are, but also just being thoughtful about the way that you engage someone,
Mm-hmm.
in that setting or in that opportunity, or even if you're at a party taking someone's photo, realizing that what you're seeing is this moment that they're
Mm-hmm.
unable to see,
Yeah.
and I'm certainly guilty of like the photo that someone tags me in. I'm like, oh, you tag me in that photo. Like, I'm sure that is not how I looked all night. And then I'm like, did I look like that
Right.
all night? You know?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is kind of that song and dance, but I think also I've started to allow myself to say, well, this person saw something in that moment that they
Mm-hmm.
thought was special. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think being able to give someone that insight is so unique and
Yeah.
such a cool opportunity if someone can just wrap their arms around it. Like they got to
Yeah.
kind of be open to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking a little bit about the advice that would be given here, if somebody wants to, make kind of a pivot into, this type of career in the visual arts. And I love
Mm-hmm.
that you even talk about yourself still pivoting. You're like, videography is the next wave. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to hear kind of what's next as well. But for
Mm-hmm.
someone who's wanting to go into that space and they're scared of branching out, what
Mm-hmm.
advice would you give to them?
Um, I would just say let your curiosity lead you.
Mm,
So if you're curious about taking photos of trees, like take photos of trees, because
mm,
that could lead you to who knows what. My curiosity started with myself. So I took self portraits first. And then once I had a grasp of who I was, then I, went to other people. And, being in New York, I had access to a lot of different types of people. And so, yeah, it was me, and then it was my friends in college, and then now it's like strangers and, people I've never met. And so, yeah, I would say, trust your starting point. It's not going to be what you expect, but neither will the journey either. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
That's so beautiful. I really
Hmm.
love the way that you position that because it is
Hmm.
sometimes we're asked to visualize. And I think about when people are going into college, and I didn't go to college because
Hmm.
probably I was asked this question. It was like, what do you want to be? And I'm like, how the fuck do I know? I don't know.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I think whatever we can visualize oftentimes will shift. And so
Yeah.
kind of staying present, but then pushing forward. When do you know it's time to sort of take it up a notch in terms of the level, or when
Hmm.
you're doing outreach or when you're setting prices? What are those
Hmm.
indicators that you look for when it comes to, okay, it's time to bump this up a little bit?
Um, I think gauging the type of work that I'm being reached out for and just seeing how I respond to it. So it's just like, you know, there's certain events where I'm just like, I don't know if I can do this again. Like, I loved it in the past, but I'm just like, I kind of want to, like, for example, I really want to photograph Vanity Fair's Oscar party,
Mm.
mostly because I'm a huge movie buff, and I'm just like, to be in a space with actors and directors and producers is like mind blowing, like I would love to just be in that environment or anything movie related. And I'm like, okay, why do I keep venturing into movie related things? And that's kind of where, again, it's that curiosity. It's like, why am I going in this direction? Like, where is it trying to take me? And like, clearly I need to be in the movie space. But yeah, I would say, when you start kind of feeling like, yeah, I don't know if I can do this anymore, or, you know, I'm realizing that I have done this so many times, and so the only way I will do it again is if I get paid X amount, then that's when you increase your rate. It's like, I don't really feel like doing this, but if you really want me, then like this is what we're gonna have to do.
Yeah.
So that's those are kind of how I gauge that bump.
Yeah. And I think
Hmm.
like speaking to the things that you've outgrown are really important, knowing
Hmm.
kind of when something is not serving you anymore and you're like,
Hmm.
oh, I did that. I don't really do that anymore. And I would imagine that probably is work that you take the focus off of in your portfolio. You know, you start to kind of put things at the top that you're wanting to lead with and tell the story that you want to tell as opposed to going chronologically.
Right. Yeah.
People are assuming success based on what they see versus what actual success is. How would you define success for yourself?
Success for myself is being fully rested. I've been enjoying doing nothing a lot, to the point where I'm just kind of like, how can I do nothing and still cover my bills and such?
And get that Christopher John Rogers, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Like, that's kind of the space that I'm in. But I also feel like success is where my passion is just a passion and it's not a job. Like, I don't want my passion to be a job anymore. Because I feel like the most successful when I'm just kind of like, let me try this and see what happens and not have to think about the expenses behind it and I can just do it. And so I'm not quite there yet, but I'm kind of close, I think.
Yeah, you're getting there. I think that, yeah. And plus you know, we'd have to pull it out of you. So
yeah,
you're not going to be running around announcing it with a microphone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. It's my husband's pet peeve.
Oh, well, and that's why it's important that you have him, and I'm guessing he's going to hype you up in those moments and, you know, give perspective. We all need that. So on those do nothing days, what's your morning routine? What's the vibe?
A workout. So either indoor cycling or strength training. Or actually, the first thing I do is I write in my journal. And then I bike to my workout class, come home. I'm either like binge watching different movies. I'm in a space where I like watching movies by the same directors back to back.
Okay. Do you have a favorite director right now that you're super into?
I have always loved Melina Masoukas. But I would say from a movie aspect, I don't know if I have a favorite, but Christopher Nolan's style is very interesting to me.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, no, Barry Jenkins is up there.
Okay.
Yeah. But I either, binge watch a movie or what do I do? I don't know. I just actually, I like using my hands a lot. So nice. I like making things. So we just moved. And so hanging up portraits has been exciting for me, like calculating the space on the walls, drilling in holes. Like, I think that's very cool. So I think in a perfect world, it's like building a chair or painting, you know, a bench or just kind of like anything DIY. Yeah. I'm all for it. That's
I feel like your home has got to feel really good too. Just like when you have those pieces.
Yeah. It's a game changer.
It is a game changer. And I think that also like knowing what you like to do that isn't your profession gives you the balance to also come back to that thing that like is getting you fired up. I mean, so where can people go to learn more about you and your work? I'll definitely be putting some links in the show notes, but let's show them the goods.
I would say, so my photography site, which is noemie-marguerite.com. And then for my video work, vimeo.com/NoemieT, I believe. Those are kind of the brunt of my portfolio. And then if you want to follow me on Instagram, I actually have 2 Instagrams.
Are we getting the Finsta? What's happening here? Yeah.
You're not. So there's a professional and then there's the personal. But my professional one is Noémie Marguerite. And yeah, that's it.
And are you still doing studio sessions in New York and LA?
I am, yes.
So folks can book that through your website, right?
Right, yes, absolutely.
because I will say that the photo that I've used for the podcast cover is shot by Noemie. So
that is true.
It is a good one. And I remember I was so stressed and nervous because I was like, oh, also I'm pregnant. I don't know. And you were like, you're fine. Let's just take these damn photos and stop explaining. You said it way nicer than that. But I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did it then. And like, so happy that that was the moment. And then next time you're in LA, we're going to get more moments. I'm going to have to
absolutely
get that set up.
I will be there in November. So,
oh, perfect. See, that's why we do this. I love that.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, tell me, what is one final thought you want to leave our listeners with today? It's been amazing having you here and just talking through your creative process and, you know, your kind of start in the space, but also all of the kind of transformations you've had, even from 10 on. What is one final thought you would like to leave folks with today?
I would probably say stay curious, you know, just don't lose that level of curiosity, because it will bring you places. It will bring you to places that you just couldn't never imagine. So
I love that. That's beautiful. And that curiosity really is like, that's the through line. I think that's thematically like where you've been at. Noemie, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. And this has really been truly a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And this has been Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question: how the fuck did you get that cool job? We'll talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.